So we start off with our prayer, which I'll read in Hebrew and then I'll translate it. Okay, this is a prayer of the Ari himself, who composed before we learn Kabbalah. ריבון עולמים ואדוני אדונים, אב רחמן וסליחות, מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, בקידה בשתחוויה, שקרבתנו לתורתך ולעבודתך עבודת הקודש, ונתת לנו חלק בסודות תורתך הקדושה, מה אנו ומחיינו, אשר עשית עמנו חסד גדול כזה. על כן אנחנו מפילים תחנוננו לפניך, שתמחור ותסלח לכל חטאותינו ועוונותינו, ואל יהיו עוונותינו מבדילים בינינו לביניך, וכן יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, שתכונן לבבינו ליראתך ולבבך. תקשיב אוזניך לדברינו אלה, ותפתח לבבינו הערל בסודות תורתך, ויהיה לימודנו זה נחת רוח, לפני כיסא כבודך כרך לכוח. ותאציל עלינו אור מקור נשמתנו ובכל בחינתנו, שיתנוצצו ניצוצות עבדיך הקדושים, אשר על ידם גילית את דבריך האלה בעולם, וזכותם וזכות אבותם, וזכות תורתם ותמימותם וקדושתם, יעמוד לנו לבן לקשר בדברים אלו. ובזכותם תראיננו במה שאנו לומדים, כמאמר נעים זמירות ישראל, גל עיני והביט הנפלאות בתורתך, כי אדוני תן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה, יהיו לו רצונים מפי, וגר ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי וגואלי. Master of the universe and Lord of lords, Father of mercy and forgiveness, we give thanks before you, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, in bowing the head and prostrating ourselves, that you brought us close to your Torah and to your service, the holiest of services, and you've given to us a portion of the inner meanings of your holy Torah. What are we and what is our life, that you've dealt with us such a great loving kindness as this? Therefore we lay our supplication before you, that you pardon and forgive all our sins and iniquities, and do not let our iniquities separate us from you. And may it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, that you prepare our hearts to have reverence of you and love of you, and may your ears listen to these our words. Open our uncircumcised heart in the inner meaning of your Torah, and may this our learning give pleasure before the throne of your glory as a sweet-smelling fragrance. Bestow upon us the light of the source of our soul in all its aspects, and may the sparks of your holy servants to whom you revealed these your words into the world shine forth. May their merit, the merit of their fathers, the merit of their Torah, their wholeness and holiness stand by us, that we do not stumble in these words. And through their merit enlighten our eyes on what we are learning, as the sweet singer of Esau said, open my eyes and I will look on the wonders of your Torah. For the Lord gives wisdom from his mouth, knowledge and understanding. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Okay, now then, right, what we're going to do today, I think is absolutely fascinating, which is discussing the whole story of Jacob and Esau. Now, I know we've been, we told it was last Shabbos, okay, but it's actually a perennial topic as actually who they were, because these demuts, the biblical characters, if you like, our forefathers and foremothers, live on inside of us. Okay, Rav Ashlag teaches that every single person is considered as a whole world. All right, so everything that's in the world is also inside every single person. And the correct way to look at Torah is to imagine it all happening inside of us. All right, it's kind of like this Gestalt idea. If anybody ever heard of Gestalt in psychotherapy, it's a kind of idea. I once did some psychotherapy with somebody who was very good at Gestalt, and the idea is that, for example, if you have a dream, then you are all the different elements in the dream. Okay, they are in fact different parts of yourself, and they're all talking to you, and so you can actually discover different aspects of yourself. And actually, in the same way, Rav Ashlag teaches us that this is the way we ought to be looking at Torah as well. So it's not that we're looking at the historical Yaakov, the historical Esau, the historical Rivka. We're actually looking at the vessels that they are, that they represent within ourselves. So we have the Yaakov within ourselves, we have the Esau within ourselves, okay? Oh dear, we have the Esau within ourselves. We have the Esau within ourselves. What can we do? We have all these different elements within ourselves, okay? And when we really understand this, then what they're doing and how they're acting is actually Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the deeds of the fathers really are a guideline for the children. And this is why it's very important for us to actually get the story of Jacob and Esau correct. Because if you read the Torah itself, the outline that is in the Torah, that's certainly accurate in the sense of that this was the actual deeds that happened, but they're very easy to misinterpret because we don't know why. We don't understand the intentions of the people involved. And as we spoke about in a different class, if you don't know the intentions, you really can't judge what's going on. And the example I gave, it's a very good example, it happens to be totally true, is when I go for a walk in the mornings, I always, well, before coronavirus, I always popped into the supermarket on my way back, okay? And of course, if you were to hear that simple sentence, everybody would think to themselves, oh, Yedida is doing her shopping on the way back from her walk in the morning, which would be a very reasonable assumption, okay? But the actual truth is that the reason I go into the supermarket on the way back is because the supermarket's got air conditioning and I'm very hot for my walk. And I like to walk around the supermarket and get cool again with the air conditioning before I have to go up the hill where I live, okay? So when you know why, okay, from this you can see that when you know why, you can actually see that that really changes, it changes the whole story. It changes what's going on. It changes your interpretation. It changes your understanding of what's going on. And that's why it's very important to understand the motives of Yaakov, particularly Yaakov, okay, in what he was doing, because on the surface it doesn't look too good. All right? When you're talking about the blessings, when you're talking about the birthright, on the surface of it all, it doesn't sound too good at all. Okay? All right. So, okay. We're going to start off by looking at a chart that I made. Now, let me see if I can find it. Is that the one? Where is it? Don't say I took it off by accident. Oh, what have I done now? I've lost it. Oh dear. Let's see if I can find it again. Yes. No, that's not the one. Hold on. Mistake. I shall find it again. That's the one. Right. Now then, let's share that. Zoom. There we go. Share picture. All right, you should be able to see that okay. Now, to find the vessels within us, which are represented by our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I made this chart. It was quite a long time ago. All right, now, can you somebody just call out and tell me if you can see it clearly? Actually, if I get rid of, let's do view, and I can, there we go. Full scale, there, no, that's no good. Close. I just want to see this one. I wanted to just see Oh well. Can you see that okay? Zoom in a bit. How about that? That's a bit better, isn't it?
It's
All
more
right.
clear.
What, sorry?
It's more clear now. We can see it now more clear.
You can see it. Okay, bless you. All right, lovely. All right, so here we've got this chart, and it tells us how we form. The Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the purpose is the Ein Sof. Okay, the Ein Sof is the infinite. That's where it all begins. Now, God Himself is called Atzmut, the essence of God, and we absolutely don't talk about that. And from Atzmut comes His light, okay, the light of God, which is His goodness, and that's called the Ein Sof, the infinite, and it actually has within it, it actually brings forth the purpose of creation. And what is the purpose of creation? Purpose of creation, that God has a desire to give goodness to all created beings. And in the level of the Ein Sof, then this very, very, very high level, where it all is one, we say, Hashem Echad Ushmo Echad. Hu Ushmo Echad. The light and the vessels are one. Hu is the light, Shmo is the vessels, and they are one. The light and the vessels are one. Okay? And then happens a process called the Tzimtzum, okay, below the level of the Ein Sof. And following that process, which we're not going to go into today, we begin to get the formation of the framework of holiness and the framework of evil. Now, the framework of holiness is what happened in the Tzimtzum, is that the vessel of God decided that it was only going to receive what it's able to receive for the sake of giving, and because it wanted to be like the light. So the light is all giving, it wants to give goodness to all created beings. The vessel is receiving, it's receiving that light, and in the Ein Sof, that's fine, there's no problem. That's what God wanted, no problem. But the vessel itself felt it wanted to be even more together with the light, even more one with the light, and it wanted to be giving just as the light is giving to it. And once it made that decision is upheld in the framework of holiness. So the framework of holiness is the will to give unconditionally, either to God or to our fellow man, in exactly the same way as God gives to us. Okay? And what's the framework of evil? The framework of evil is simply that the vessel continues to want to receive, just as the way it did in the Ein Sof, but it wants to receive it only for itself. Okay? So it's basically the original vessel, but it's not abiding by the decision that the vessel actually made. So it's sort of like a regressed. It's like it's a regression. It's gone back into sort of babyhood and wants to just keep receiving for itself alone. It doesn't want to grow up. Okay? And that actually is forms the framework of evil. The desire to receive for ourselves alone without wanting to do any of the work of giving. Okay? Now, these two basic ways of being come into being within ourselves. We have the framework of holiness is represented within ourselves as the soul, also called the Yetzer HaTov, and in the within ourselves we have the Yetzer Hara, okay, which is also represented by the ego, which will be the evil within us. Now, the framework of holiness starts off in the Torah by being in Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, okay, then with the tree of life, And then we get a representative of the framework of evil, who is the snake, okay? And the tree of knowledge also, okay? And the tree of knowledge is not in its essence evil, but it contains the will to receive, okay? And that, in fact, is not what Adam and Eve had. Adam and Eve did not have a will to receive at that point. It says they were naked in the garden and they were not ashamed. And that nakedness means that they did not have vessels of receiving, okay? They didn't have vessels of receiving, and that's why it says they were naked and they were not ashamed, okay? And then they ate, of course, you know the story, from the tree of knowledge. The snake was like a mobile, wriggly representative of the will to receive oneself alone, and enticed Adam and Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge. Now, this was not, in fact, as much as a mistake as it looks, okay? It was definitely happened by the will of God, okay? God wanted it to happen. Why would he want such a thing to happen? Why would he want Adam to get within himself the framework of evil? Because actually, in fact, that's the only way you get free choice. You've got to have both of those within ourselves in order to get the choice. And so this is what then happens, is that we now have the more complete version of the human being, which is ourselves. And we have two frameworks in the one being. The Yetzer HaTov, which is the will to give unconditionally, the soul, and the Yetzer Hara, which is the will to receive oneself alone, which is the ego. The ego. Okay? And as you know, in every human being, we have both. They rather tend to cancel each other out, so we tend to express them at different times. Time is a gift that's been given to the human being precisely because of this. You see, all the other spiritual worlds don't have time. It's all a sort of a constant present, okay? They don't have time in the way we experience time. We are given time because we have within us both impulses, both to do good and to do evil. And we can't express them both at the same time. So we have a time when we're doing the negative, and hopefully a time when we do tshuva and do the positive. Okay? Right. Now then, vessels of giving unconditionally, okay, just I want to give, being altruistic and being giving, the Yetzer Tov, leads automatically to the framework of holiness. Okay? Very nice. Okay? That's where we want to be. The mitzvot in general lead us to the framework of holiness. Now, the vessels for receiving the light of God, as used in the thoughts of creation, can do either. You can transform those vessels of receiving and bring them into holiness. Okay? Like, for example, let's take somebody who has got the midah of being very angry. Okay? He tends to be an angry person. Okay? So what's he going to do? How's he going to get that, midah of being angry? How's he going to bring that into holiness? Well, instead of getting angry and, beating up his wife, God forbid, or yelling at his children, he takes his anger and he uses it for bringing social justice into the world, for example. Okay? That would be taking a vessel for receiving and bringing it into the framework of holiness. And that is definitely one of the ways of taking our vessels of receiving and working with them. Okay? Bringing them into holiness. But if we just leave them the way they are, then they just want to receive for themselves alone. Like a person gets angry and he, naturally just flares out at whoever's nearby. And that creates and it adds light to the framework of evil. Now, the framework of evil is exists, obviously, as we can know, we can see, okay? But it's a very limited, I know it looks big, but it's actually limited because it cannot actually receive any of God's light, or if only a tiny bit, just enough to keep it going. Now, having discussed all that, let's see where our forefathers fit into this framework. Abraham, okay? Abraham was always in the framework of holiness. His midah is chesed. His vessels are always giving, and in fact constitute what's called the essence of the tikkun of creation, that transformation of taking the vessel, or the original vessel in the Ein Sof, and bringing it into giving. Okay? Yitzhak actually has very huge vessels. He actually is given the vessels of receiving. They're more problematic. But what does he do? He transforms them completely at the time of the Akedah, and is now only using his vessels of receiving only for the sake of giving pleasure to God. Okay? He takes those vessels of receiving and completely uses them only for giving. Okay? And he actually has now the capacity to fulfill the purpose of creation. Because if we remember, what's the purpose of creation? The will of God's purpose of creation is to give goodness to all created beings. Okay? So in order to give that goodness, there has to be somebody who's able to receive them. And that, the first person who's absolutely transformed to receive all the goodness of the created that God wants to give, it was Yitzhak. Okay? Because Avraham did kind of like, he's kind of halfway house. Avraham is all giving, so at least he's in affinity of form with the Creator. But that's called the tikkun of creation. But Yitzhak actually fulfills the purpose of creation. Amazing. We do not realize from the little that's written in the Tanakh about Yitzhak how very, very, very great tzaddik Yitzhak really was. Really was. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Probably the greatest. Okay? Now, because he has actually fulfilled the purpose of creation, he's also the one who's able to give blessings to ensure the fulfillment of the purpose of creation. That's the inyan, that Yitzhak can give these blessings. Avraham doesn't have the capacity to give these blessings because he doesn't have these completed vessels. Yitzhak does. Of course, Avraham had a big part in it. Avraham holid it Yitzhak. Okay. Nevertheless, it's Yitzhak who's got the capacity of giving these blessings to ensure the fulfillment of the purpose of creation. All right? Okay. Now, who are we left with? Esau. Esau also had vessels of receiving, okay? But he didn't do anything with them. He just used them, wants to use them just the way they are. He doesn't want to transform them. He doesn't want to transform anything. He just wants to hang out there and do and receive the good life, what he conceives as the good life, okay? And he's taking these vessels which are the will to receive, which come from the purpose of creation, but he's giving them, using them with the Yetzer Hara. He's not doing any work with them. He is just simply wanting to receive with them. So there we have Esau, okay? And now, what about Yaakov? Yaakov is actually very similar to Avraham. Okay, he starts off very similar to Avraham. Okay, he's basically Ish or Halim. Okay, he just wants to be giving, and he wants to be doing Torah, and he wants to be he's basically like Avraham. He starts off like Avraham. But it doesn't finish like that. And we're going to find out why. Okay? Because Yaakov actually needs to come to the middle line. What is the middle line? Middle line means he takes the vessels of receiving and brings them only to receive for the sake of giving unconditionally to the Creator in a way that combines both Avraham and Yitzchak together. Okay? Combines the tikkun of creation with the purpose of creation, and that gives you the middle line, which is Tiferet. So Avraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevurah, and Yaakov is Tiferet. Okay. But Yaakov needs a tikkun to come to it. He's not ready for it yet. All right. Now, I'm going to stop the share. Okay. And just ask, is everybody all okay with all of that? Yes? No?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, okay.
Hooray! Okay,
Okay.
great. All
Thank
right
you.
then. Terrific. Okay then. Right. Now then, what we're going to do next is we're going to see how does all this pan out in the story. So right. I'm going to change the share screen. Dun 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 dun. Okay, so here we've got on this page the verses that we're going to look at today. All right, which is going to look at how these different vessels play out in the story. All right, and we're going to see how we can find them within ourselves as well. Hopefully, let me get that a nice bit bigger for you all. View, zoom. Is that better? It makes it kind of faint, in my view. Let's do a go. I don't know. Oh, that's worse. Sorry. Try that again. Let's see if that's better. That looks about right. Okay. Right. So we start off with a prophecy. Okay. And what happened? We looked at this, I think it was last week. But we looked in connection with Rivka last week. And and Rivka is at long last pregnant. She was also barren like Sarah, her mother-in-law, was as well. And Yitzchak davened for her, and she's now pregnant. And she finds Vitrotzutzur banim b'kirba. Now, the Zohar says Vitrotzutzur is, they weren't just like giving kicks, but they were really fighting each other. There was really a fight going on in there. Okay? Vatomim ken lama zel nochi. And she said, well, what on earth is going on here? Okay? V'telech lidrosh et Hashem. She goes to ask God. Okay? And the Midrash says that what did she actually notice? She noticed that whenever she went via some sort of place of Avodah Zorah, one of them would be kicking like crazy to get out. And whenever she went to a place of Torah, the other one would be kicking to get out. I don't know if she knew she had twins at that point. I mean, I don't really know how one would know, I mean, in those days, but I suppose maybe she did. Okay? But still, it's a very peculiar situation. V'yomar Hashem la, and God said to her, Shnei goyim bebitnech. You've got 2 nations in your belly. All right? 2 totally different concepts. 2 completely opposed ideas. 2 completely opposed ways of being. Shnei lu'umim mimech yipareidu. 2 nations will come forth from your guts. Ule'om yematz, and one will strive with the other. V'rav yavod tza'ir, and the greater will serve the younger. All right. Now, just everybody imagine, okay, ourselves as having 2 aspects within us which are totally different and which fight each other. Anybody want to give that a name? Okay. How about body and soul? How about Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Ra? We actually have that situation within us, don't we? It's like those 2. We've got the Yetzer HaTov, which wants to connect with Torah. That's brought you all here today. We've got the Yetzer Hara, okay, which wants to connect with everything else in the world except Torah, okay? And they fight. Those impulses fight within each other, fight within ourselves. Ule'um yematz. V'rav yavod tza'ir. That's the prophecy. That the bigger one, which one's bigger? The Yetzer Tov or the Yetzer Hara? The Yetzer Hara is much bigger. It's huge. Okay? But Rav Yavod Sa'ir. Okay? The greater will serve the younger. That's the promise. That's the prophecy. That even though the Yetzer Tov, which is within that, when we get born, the Yetzer Hara is the dominant one. Okay? And we stay with the Yetzer Hara till we're 13 years of age for a boy, 12 for a girl, okay? And this is how we all are. Rav Yavod Sa'ir. And nevertheless, even though our will to receive, our ego is much stronger, much bigger vessel than is our will to give, nevertheless, ultimately, this is the promise that the soul will conquer. All right. So that, then you see how it applies to us. It's not just something in history there. Okay, let's go back to our screen. Here we are. V'yimalu yameha laledet, v'hinei tomim bebitna. And her days came filled to give birth, and their twins in her belly. V'yetzer rishon admoni, and the first one came forth very red. Kulo ka'aderet se'ar, and is covered with se'ar. Rav Ashlag says it's like se'arot. It's like, desires, stormy. Okay? V'kol shemo Esau. And I learnt this year, because I never understood the meaning of the word Esau. Like he's done, he's complete, he came like ready to go, all mature. After that came forth his brother. V'yado ocheset ba'ekev Esau. And his hand is holding on to the heel of Esau. Why? Because he knows that he has to do the tikkun for Esau. Okay. V'yikra shemo Yaakov. Who called his name Yaakov? What do you mean? Like right in the middle of the sentence, it says Vayikra. He called his name Yaakov. Who? Doesn't say who. There's no subject to the sentence like that. Okay? And the Zohar says God himself named him Yaakov. Okay? And he gave him the extra yod in his name. I can't remember. I think it was for protection or something. All right. Vayitzchak ben Shishim Shana. What? Sorry?
I find that strange because God also gave him the name Israel.
Yes, that's right. God gave him two names. God gave him the first name of Yaakov, and then later on God gave him the name Yisrael as well. Yeah, sure. Why is it why we can't have two names?
I would figure that it would indicate something's wrong, right? Like why is there a need for a second name?
I don't think it means there's anything wrong. I think on the contrary, it means that there's growth. Okay? If you imagine that Yisrael is like the totally full potential. Okay? And Yaakov applies when he's not using all aspects of the vessel. Okay? There's not anything wrong. It's just a different usage.
That makes sense.
Okay, that's good. All right. V'Yitzchak ben Shishim Shana beledet otam. So Yitzchak was 60 years old when he gave birth to them. That means a particular sfirah is using. V'yigdelu hanarim, and the lads grew. All right, and each one grew according to his own nature. In what way? Vayhi Esau ish yodea tzayid ish sadeh. So first of all, they're describing Esau, who's ish yodea tzayid. Now, and normally translated as a hunter, okay, a man of the field. But there's a lot going on here, which is not just the way it looks on the surface. Okay. I saw there was a chat. Hold on a second. You can ask the Rav about the two names. It's actually, yeah, it's in the Zohar also. Sure, we can, definitely. Okay, thank you, Dorit. Okay. And Ish Yodeh Tzayid means that we've got, it's first of all hinting at Nimrod. Because it says about Nimrod, the only other time so far in the Tanakh that the word Tzayid has been used was about Nimrod. Nimrod was Ish Tzayid Lifnei Hashem. Now, what is this Tzayid about? The next time we get the word Tzayid, when Yitzchak tells Esau to go get him Seidah. Okay? Now, the word Tzayid, Seidah, is actually the desire to receive. It's the goodness of God, okay, in the vessels of receiving. That's what it's about. Now, Yitzchak is capable of using those vessels. He's capable of using those vessels and receiving in those vessels, okay, because he has within himself all the transformation of the purpose of creation. And that's the meaning when he says to Esau before the blessings, go and get me tzeidah, okay? Get me this fulfillment of the vessels of receiving. So Esau Ish Yodeh Said is telling you about what type of vessels he has. The desire to receive. Huge vessels of the desire to receive. That's Esau. Yaakov Ish Tam. Yaakov's vessels are much smaller. Okay? But they are perfect. What does it mean by perfect? In the sense that they are not separated from God, and he has this ability to Yoshev Ohalim, to sit and learn Torah, and he's basically concerned with giving. So here you have the two sides of the human being, okay, now actually expressed in two different people. Yaakov is the Yetzer HaTov, Esau is expressing the Yetzer Hara. All right? And it's like as if the one pregnancy that Rivka has, the two aspects of the human being, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, have gone into two different people. All right? V'yahav Yitzchak et Esau, and Yitzchak loved Esau, kitzayt bepiv, because he was using these big vessels. Now, Yitzchak, I think, simply couldn't imagine using them in the framework of evil. I think it just was completely so far beyond him. It was completely out of his vocabulary. As far as we know, Yitzchak had always used his vessels only for good, and the ultimate, of course, was the Akedah, and he's just in Kedusha. Never occurs to him that anybody of his own children could be using them with Tum'ah, and the fact remains is that as long as Avraham was still alive, because Avraham was the one who taught the boys, Esau pretended to be good, at least. That's one of the ideas of tzad bepiv. He pretended. Okay, he could speak nicely. But Yaakov was not deceived. So Yitzchak, who had these big vessels, loved Esau, who had these big vessels also. And he didn't know the evil deeds of Esau. That's totally clear. He had no idea. And that's one of the reasons why it says Vatikahena einav mera'ot, that he was blind and couldn't see, was that God wanted him not to be able to see the wicked deeds of Esau. Rivka ohevet Yaakov, and Rivka loves Yaakov. Why does she love Yaakov? Because he's similar to her. He's got the vessels of giving, just as Rivka's got the vessels of giving. And we saw that last week when we looked at how Rivka, when Eliezer came to the well, she didn't hesitate. She just went and gave unconditionally to this complete stranger. And by doing that, changed her life and the lives of the whole of the Jewish people. Okay? Right, so far so good. So what happens next? The next piece in the story is Vayazed Yaakov Nazid, and Yaakov was making lentil soup. Why was he making lentil soup? Because lentils are round, and this is a symbol of wholeness and completeness. And by tradition, they are a food which you give to mourners to remind them of the completeness of the world and completeness of God's goodness, the roundness. And it was the day when Avraham Avinu died. Now, so long as Avraham Avinu was alive, Esau behaved himself. Now that he's dead, V'yavo Esau min hasadeh v'hu ayef. Esau comes in from the field. You can take this as the field, the physical field, but you can also take the sadeh as the malchut. The word sadeh in the Kabbalah very often refers to the malchut. Okay, place of giving, place of deciding. V'ayef. He's exhausted. Why was he exhausted? Okay. The Midrash said it was because he had gone out into the field and there he'd murdered Nimrod. We talked about the affinity of Esau and Nimrod. Why would he want to do such a thing? Because Nimrod had the garments that God made for Adam and Eve when they had sinned in the Garden of Eden. He gave them garments. What does these garments mean? Garments are kelim, vessels. All right? So Esau has now got these vessels, which somehow or other found their way to this evil man Nimrod. And one of the functions that, of course, it wasn't good that Esau went and murdered Nimrod, but he's now got hold of these garments. V'yom Esau el Yaakov, and Esau says to Yaakov, Hali iteni na min ha'adom ha'adom hazeh, ki ayef anochi. Please give me to eat from this very red stew, for I am very exhausted. Okay? Now, all this has got meaning. Arkain Karashamo Edom. His name after that was not called Esau. If you look in the Tanakh after this, he's now called Edom. Why is he called Edom? Because he let go of his Bechorah. He let go of his birthright at this thing. He swapped his birthright for the lentil soup. Okay? So he's no longer Esau. He swapped his birthright. He's given away part of himself in order to get some lentil soup. And so therefore, in a way, he's called Adom, after the lentil soup. The Edom. Vayome Yaakov, Michra hayo kayom et bechoratecha li. Now, and the Zohar says that, in fact, Esau didn't want the Bechorah. He really didn't want it. And not only that, he pleaded with Yaakov many times to take it. But Yaakov didn't trust Esau. And so he said, okay, eventually he said, all right, I'll take the Bechorah. But you have to sell it to me. Okay, he sold it to him. What Bechorah are we talking about? Okay? The firstborn. Okay, the firstborn has more inheritance. Okay, it's double the amount of inheritance. He has other privileges. Okay, so what is this Bechorah? What does this mean? The Bechorah also is responsibility. Esau didn't want that. It's not tents and camels and things. It's the need to have faith in God. That was Abraham's heritage. That's Yitzhak's heritage. Esau said, do me a favor, I don't want this heritage, thank you. I don't want to have to believe in God. I don't want to have put God into my reckoning. This is just exactly what the Hara says within us all the time. I don't want to deal with what God wants. Okay, this is what the Hara says. Okay, the fact that the ideas of what Esau says exactly within us as well. He says, I don't want all this. And the will to receive for ourselves alone is liable to, sell anything. Look, here am I getting very disconnected from myself, from God. I can't handle this. It's too much for me. And he said, okay, I'll swear. And he swore it to him. So he sold his rights as a firstborn to Jacob. And what for? And Yaakov natan le'Esav lechem v'nazid adashim. And Yaakov gave to Esau bread and lentil stew. V'yochal v'yesht v'yakom v'yelach, and he ate and he drank and he got up and he went. V'yevez Esau et ha-bechorah, and Esau despised the bechorah. He despised the faith in God. Well, the Yetzer Hara does despise the Yetzer HaTov. Thinks it's wishy-washy. Okay? So we have to just ignore it, you know? So the Vayivez Esau the Bechorah, he didn't want Emunah B'Shem. He didn't want to keep the mitzvot. He wanted to live the life he wanted. And he didn't want to have to actually deal with the Yetzer HaTov. Okay? So this is the first episode. Now, when you look at it with the Zohar and understanding who the people were here, then you actually see that Yaakov did something good. Because instead of the Bechorah staying with somebody who despised it, it's now brought into Kedusha. So this is the first bringing of those vessels of receiving into Kedusha. By Yaakov taking on the Bechorah, he's taking on all those vessels of which belonged originally to Esau and bringing them into Kedusha. And that was the first step that Yaakov did. And then we get to the actual brachot. And it's 8:24. I don't know how much time we've got, but anyhow. Vayhi ki zaken Yitzhak v'tikahain einav me'orot, v'yikad Esav bano gadol, v'yom elav bani, v'yom elav hineni. And Yitzhak was old and his eyes were dim from seeing, and it was on purpose. God did not want him to see the evil deeds of Esau, and there was a reason for it. And he called Esau his oldest son, and he said to him, "My child," and he said to him, "Here I am." And he said, "Look, I've got old and I don't know the day of my death. Go get your arrows and your beard and your bows and your arrows, and go out to the field and hunt for me tzeidah." Okay? And the Zohar says that at the moment he said that, the whole throne of God shook. Because he said, "No, don't tell him to go do that." Because they understood that the tzeidah is all the goodness of God. That's not what we need. With the Or Chochmah, the great light of God. V'naseh li matzamim kasher ahavti, and make me something tasty. Ta'amuru ki tov Hashem. It's like the actual Gilui Hashem, the actual manifestation of God's light happening here. Kasher ahavti. Ve'via li ochela, and then I'll eat it. Bavur tvarechacha nafshi, so my soul will bless you. B'terem amut. Now, what is the purpose of these blessings? The blessings is, in what way are we going to come to the Gemara Tikkun? Who's going to rule? Okay, and like I say, only Yitzchak had the power to give these blessings. Is it going to be Yaakov or is it going to be Esau? And they've got these two, the Yetzer HaTov or the Yetzer Hara, and here they are in two completely different people. Rivka Shomat. We looked at that last time. Rivka Shomat. What do you mean she heard? V'daber Yitzchak el Esav bano. How did she hear this? Well, she was behind the doorway, listening. No, the Shekhinah told her. Okay? And Esav's gone off to the field, Latsud side Lavi, and to bring back this hunting, that this goodness of God that to Yitzhak. Rivka amra el Yaakov bana, but Rivka calls to Yaakov her child. Lemor hinei shamati avicha medaber le'esav achicha. Lemor, here I've heard your father speaking to your brother Esau. Havir li tzayid v'aseh li matamim v'ochela. Bring to me this goodness of God. Make me tasty stew and I'll eat it. V'avarechecha. Do you see how many cuffs there are there? V'avarechecha, I will bless you. Bless you twice. One with the Bechorah and one with the Gemara Tikkun. Before the Lord, before my death. I mean, Yitzhak didn't know about the Bechorah at this point. Okay? But nevertheless, the Tanakh knew. V'ata b'ni shema b'koli. And now, my child, listen to my voice. L'asher ani metzaveh etchach lechne latzon v'kach li misham shnei gediyei zim tovim. Go to the flock and take for me from there 2 he-goats. Why 2 he-goats? Can an old man who's blind eat a whole goat, 1 whole goat? Of course not. So what do you need 2 for? Because Yitzchak knew that in the Atid, in the future, Bnei Yisrael will be offering up 2 he-goats on Yom Kippur. And who's the tikkun that we do? Yitzchak's tikkun. Yitzchak's tikkun belongs on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's when we do the tikkun of Yitzchak. Okay, the kelim of Kabbalah. And we offer up 2 he-goats. Rivka knew all this in her Ruach HaKodesh, so she gave to Yaakov these 2 goats. Okay? So it's all symbolic. V'seotam k'matamim li'avicha kasher ahev v'eveta lavicha v'achal b'avu shivarecha lifnei moto. And I will make them tasty stew to your father, just as he loves. I will bring them to your father, and he'll eat them, so that he will bless you before his death. Yaakov says to Rivka, his mother, Hen Esau achi ish sa'ir, v'anochi ish halak. Basically, what is he saying here? He's saying Esau's got the right kelim to receive the blessings, because he does. He's got the blessings of the Gemara Tikkun. He's got the vessels of the purpose of creation. Esau is the vessels of the purpose of creation. But Yaakov is Ish Halak. Yaakov doesn't have such vessels. What's he going to use to receive these blessings of the Gemara Tikkun with? He's Ish Halak. Now we see what Rivka does to solve the problem. She says, you need to put on the vessels of Esau. Like you yourself, it's true, you yourself don't have the correct vessels with which to receive the blessings of the Gemara Tikkun, because you don't have the right vessels for it. But Esau does. Put on his clothes and cover your hands up with the hairy skin from the goats, okay? And that will be fine. And the main thing is the clothes. So Yaakov goes into Yitzchak wearing the garments of Esau, wearing his clothes, putting on his vessels, okay? Because then he now has the vessels with which to receive the purpose of creation, as we saw right in the very beginning of our chart. Okay? Now, Yaakov has both his own kelim, which is the kelim of Torah, the kelim of the right-hand line, the kelim of faith, the kelim of giving, the kelim of the soul. But he's now taking in with him the kelim of Esau, not the whole performance. He's not Esau himself, it's just his clothes. Nevertheless, he's taking that in with him to receive the blessings. And why is that important? So important is that the blessings go primarily to Yaakov in the way of giving, but also to Esau. That Esau's vessels are also used to receive the great light of the purpose of creation, and they will be present also at the Gemara Tikkun. And this is what we're promised, that even the Yetzer Hara, which is within us and represents the Esau within us, will ultimately be restored to the Malach HaKadosh, to a holy angel. Okay, so even the Yetzer Hara will be restored and will be only used for the Yetzer, and will be restored to only be used for good. Okay? Now, the inner meanings here of the Brachot and precisely what was said and how and all that, I mean, it's just incredibly beautiful. But I think, my dear friends, I've been talking for a whole hour, and I think that is enough for today. Okay. So did we get the idea of Yaakov and Esau? Okay, and how they are true representatives of the Yetzer Tov within others and the Yetzer Hara. And the Gemara Tikkun is to make sure that the balance between them is correct, and this is what these blessings were for. And the blessings were for that they should both be blessed, but Rav Yavod Tzair, that the Yetzer Hara will serve the Yetzer HaTov. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful. Great.
We can ask the
Thank you very
question.
much.
I also very interested in the question he asked. Why Yaakov has two names?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say that when I first learnt this a couple of years ago, it blew me away completely. I mean, I never heard this material before. To me, it was just like amazing.
It was two
Absolutely
names by
amazing,
God.
astonishing.